Hello, everyone. I'm Sachin from Defender Experts for XDR team. Along with Edward and Michael, we welcome you to another exciting episode of Defender Experts for XDR video series. Through this engaging series, you will get behind-the-scene glimpse into Defender Experts for XDR service. We dive into conversation with our dedicated research teams, analysts, SDMs, and other key personas who work tirelessly to ensure the security of Defender Experts for XDR customers.
Hi, everyone. I'm Edward from the Microsoft Global Black Belt Security Team. Before we dive into today's episode, let's do a quick recap of the last episode. In the last episode, we had the pleasure to be joined by Brian, a seasoned research lead from the Microsoft Defender Experts for XDR team. During the episode, we delved into how the integration of threat intelligence, AI, and research team enriches a robust, adaptive, and proactive defense mechanism within the Defender Experts for XDR service. If you missed the episode, I highly recommend catching up on it. It will bring you up to speed on our current video series.
Absolutely, Edward. And today we have an incredible guest with us, Michael, a seasoned research lead specializing in SOC operations and leading Defender Experts analyst team. Michael has a wealth of experience in this field of cybersecurity and is a true leader when it comes to safeguarding organizations from security threats. He has seen it all, from evolving cybersecurity threats to leading high-performance teams in managing security operations. Michael, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for having me, all. I'm definitely glad to be here.
Yeah. Michael, before we dive into your current role in the Defender Experts team, I want to give our audience a bit of background on you. You've been in the industry for quite a while. Could you share with us how your journey into cybersecurity world began, sir?
Sure. So I like to look at cybersecurity a little bit more broadly, right? So when I was a kid, I got into I did a lot of tinkering, right? I really love computers. It was just one of my things. One of my things was I like to mess with saved game files and writing little prank programs and such. I was taking like programming courses back when I was in high school and such, just kind of getting into hex setting your game file, figuring out how you can add infinite money and silly stuff like that, right? So I kind of already knew that I was going to get into computer at some point in time, but I didn't have the best grades for one, and I knew I wanted to do something a little different, a little exciting before getting into a desk job. So I spent a couple of years in the Navy. Navy taught me a bunch about avionics, RF, working a lot of radio type systems. And ultimately, it kind of got my interest in the other side of tech, right? Maybe it is still tech, but it's not what we would traditionally call cybersecurity today, basically how RF systems work and such. But while I was there, I got a bunch of certifications, including my MCSC 2000 in the evenings at a local tech school. I got out after 4 years, spent a couple years as a government contractor, got into Active Directory and PKI, so a lot of cryptography and authentication. And I kind of became the guy, if anybody who's worked around defense, I was one of the guys you would go to if you had to unstig a box. Anybody who's used the gold disk in the old days knows there's that magic fix-all button that writes everything all over the registry and makes it impossible to take apart. Yeah. I was the guy who was always taking that apart and making your server work again so your system would actually work. So I kind of got into it just out of pure interest and passion. Had a chance to get my CISSP while I was in there. So I got that knocked out. And then after a couple of years of that, I was lucky enough to be, my customer was one of the first customers for Microsoft, what used to be called DART, now is Microsoft Incident Response. They were doing one of the first proactive engagements. So when they were there, I had a chance to work with them doing some cyber tasks like offloading SSL, using ISA server, which then later became TMG, or the Threat Management Gateway. Right. I had some scripting tasks, and eventually they decided to stand up a second incident response team, and they were looking for an infrastructure guy. Well, my sysadmin background, passion for cyber, and a little bit of schooling kind of helped me be a good candidate for that. So got in that way. Spent some time. In the beginning, it was mostly intellectual property theft investigations we did. I spent about 7 years traveling all over the world doing hundreds of IRs for different customers. Kind of watched the advent of targeted ransomware like SamSam way back in the day and fileless malware. And then ultimately got into leading the development of their in-house capabilities at DART, the way that we would ultimately mine out and find these bad guys hiding in the enterprise.
Thanks a lot, Michael. That is amazing. It is so interesting how the field of cybersecurity draws you in. And once you start to understand it, that's it. Now, in your current role, in which you lead Defender Experts operations, you must be seeing some intense and critical work. Can you share a bit about your current role and how does your day-to-day looks like?
Sure. So I operate in a few capacities. First and foremost, I'm one of many escalation paths that we have for determining human adversary, like hands-on keyboard types attacks. We've got a couple of people who are former Microsoft incident response on our team, or incident response from other organizations that help out as well. I'm one of the paths for that. I also help operate our data. We have a development project around data fusion. So as you can imagine with Microsoft, we've got all kinds of good information in all kinds of places. And the problem we run into is that it's in all different types of schemas, and not all of it really is aligned with an analyst workflow. So a couple of years ago, we started up an effort to kind of fuse that and align it with how an analyst works. So I kind of run that project for the most part, helping pull all the information into a single contiguous entity-based story that helps us investigate devices and users and IP addresses across different disparate sources. I also spend a lot of time providing analyst perspective into our in-house development activity. We've got a bunch of really smart devs and PMs out there making products, and a lot of what I do is also helping make sure it shapes and fits the analyst workflow, helping shape what gets on the backlog to make sure it helps out, helps basically make us more efficient and more effective. But like beyond that, metrics and reporting is a big thing because any security operations center has to be efficient, right? We've got really highly valuable resources. We got to make sure we're using them to the best of our abilities. So figuring out where we have gaps, where we need to change staffing, and then along with that comes operating costs and looking at proposed changes to the service and looking at the impact. So it's kind of I do a couple of different roles between pure cybersecurity, big data, and ultimately looking at the service as a whole, trying to, from an operational perspective, and figuring out how can we improve our ops.
We can only guess and imagine the level of responsibility that comes with you and your role that you do. It's got to be immense. Can you please describe how the analyst team collaborates with the Microsoft research, security research team and the Defender's product group? How do you interact?
Absolutely. So we work together in a bunch of different ways. We are a part of research technically. The analysts are all part of the research organization. We provide indicators of compromise directly into the product. So as we're watching threats hit customers, we're directly feeding in things into the product so that we can block it, not necessarily just at that customer, but also if possible globally. We also work closely with Mystic, which is the Microsoft Threat Intelligence Center. So essentially, their job is to look at the human side, if you will. I like to say left of the breach, to try and figure out and connect different activities and different patterns into to crime organizations and such. And we trade insights back and forth that way. There's also some work we do around identifying protection gaps. So basically, sometimes you're going to come across something that just slips by. We work together with the research teams to figure out how do we improve signatures and such to improve our signal to noise ratio, basically getting rid of false positives, but also improve our true positives if we miss something. And then we also tend to provide insights into how we can improve the Defender stack to better serve operations. So as a managed service provider, essentially a managed detection response provider, we have a lot of insight in what it means to run an ops team on this platform. And as a result, we work together with those teams to make sure that the way that people work with incidents and such, hopefully in the future, is going to improve.
Thanks, Michael. I'll call that incredibly interesting and deep. You have shared a lot of insights that will be really helpful for our audience. Now, to give our audience a better understanding, can you share some additional examples of the type of threats you encounter?
Yeah, so at the end of the day, Defender Extras for XDR is an ops team. We see all the stuff that a typical security operations team is going to see. Lots of phishing, account compromise, malware. We do occasionally see some post-breach activity. That's happened a couple of times because either the customer is already compromised before they came onto the service, sometimes because we have a novel TTP or tactics, techniques, and procedures or exploits that are happening out there in the wild. Something just blooms out of nowhere. Or we've also had scenarios where the Defender stack may not be deployed. So we'll see signal coming from another box against one of the boxes that we do have eyes on that tells us, hey, something is not right over here. So that's a lot of our stuff, though, is typical what you see for a security operations team.
Okay. Yeah, I can imagine you don't try to deviate from too much from the industry norm. But can you give us an example of a recent threat actor or an incident that highlights some of that hard work that you do, whatever you can talk about, but that really goes into how you keep customers safe?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, well, first and foremost, obviously, anything dealing with cyber activity is highly confidential for the organization. So I can't go into any real deep details, but I can speak in generality, especially around a trend. Like one of the things we recently observed, we saw a wave where a threat actor was exploiting internet-facing remote administration tools. So basically, a tool that lets you log in and manage a system. So we saw this activity start happening out of the blue. It's actually a difficult one to detect because it's using all legitimate tools. It's not a malware-centered thing. They're not breaking passwords. They're exploiting a vulnerability. So ultimately, what we're looking for is the later stage stuff. So when somebody logs in and they trip an alarm, something either leads to a Defender Experts notification or a DEN, or they trip an alert inside the Defender product because of the activity they're performing. So we had to dig in and quickly isolate devices and invalidate user accounts to limit the compromise. This one was actually particularly difficult, though, for us because this remote administration service is internet facing, and we can't really see the architecture of the entire application because we're looking at it from the perspective of an EDR. So, we had to coordinate with the SDMs to try and piece together the story with the customer and ultimately eradicate the control capability the adversary had as a result of that overexposure.
Yeah, I can imagine. And it being a sanctioned application makes it a little bit harder, right? Because this is something that they allowed in their environment to do the work, but now it's being exported and not quite living off the land, but living off an application that was sanctioned of a sort, right? Man, that's interesting. And that's our listeners and viewers know that the best intentions can be exported for negative, nefarious activities. And that brings us to the end of today's episode. Thank you, Michael, so much. This was super informative. It allows me to start piecing together all the different security aspects of Microsoft tooling, as well as the individuals like yourself and the rest of your team. And to our listeners, this brings us to the end of the episode. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Defender Experts for XDR video series. Until next time, stay safe.
Stay vigilant.
There you go. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks, y'all.
everyone. Thanks.
Happy hunting.
Happy hunting.
Okay.